together today, but for many reasons, most of it out of our control, we're not, but yet we wanted to engage. And for those of you that have not taken the time to look into who Carey Lohrenz is, that she is a University of Wisconsin graduate, where she was on the varsity crew team and aspired actually even at the Olympic level. From there, she attended the Naval's AOCS, Officers Candidate School, where she went through flight training and became the very first F-14 Tomcat carrier-based pilot for the U.S. Navy. I'm hoping that I'm getting all of that correct. She's currently working on her master's degree in strategic planning and administration, and she's had the luxury of working and consulting with a lot of very well-known firms such as Cisco, Dell, Teva, Verizon, AT&T, State Farm Insurance, and many others. So she brings in an amazing background. And what we were going to do today is I was just going to kind of fire a couple quick questions, since we are going to have Carey come visit with us next year in 2021 at our sales exchange at Lake Tahoe. So, Carey, thank you for being here.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yep. And we've heard the glad to be here before. And a lot of the people that will listen to this will understand where we heard it. So I won't steal that thunder, but we all know that term, glad to be here, from some other people that have spoken and presented to the organization. So I guess the first thing, in light of all of the things in the external environment that are affecting society and our business, that has made things really change, can you explain to me how your path and your resiliency and the challenges that you had to reach your vision quest, your end goal, and the stick-to-itiveness you had, how has that helped you through what we're going through right now as a society and as organizations that are trying to remain relevant?
Yeah, that's a great question, because sometimes I'll run across people that will find out what I did for my background, and they're like, "Well, I don't really get it. Like, how does flying fighter jets have to do with anything that I do in my work?" But I spent about 10 years in the Navy planning, executing, and debriefing really large, complex missions, working in really big, diverse, and international teams. But for the last 15 years, I've worked with outstanding organizations, Fortune 1, Fortune 500 companies, helping people build not only their own individual leadership skill sets, but high performing teams. And there are some common threads when you look at high performance. And what I've discovered, that, and what I'm struck by and continue to be again and again, is that both in the world of business and in military aviation, that we're both called on to perform really highly complex and high pressured tasks in always demanding and changing environments. And as soon as you might start to get comfortable with some new routine or some change, blammo, out of the blue, something else happens. So the people who are really able, people are counting on you to be able to make good decisions during really volatile times. And what I found to be true is that no matter your situation, whether you're, flying high speed fighter jets on and off aircraft carriers, or you find yourself suddenly going on month number 3 working virtually and trying to figure out how you are supposed to be successful, is that the number one way for you to remain relevant and be the best leader you can be, either on an individual level or even on a team level, is to be able to work through fear and work through uncertainty and move forward in spite of that. And what I found to be the case is that from a principal perspective, there are like 3 big personal attributes that I found to be the most reflected in those high performers and people who have performed at a high level for a sustained amount of time. And that is that they are able to always operate with courage. They operate with tenacity, and always with integrity to their personal values and even to their missions, values, and successes.
Great.
I'll take a breath and let you pop in.
And this is a little different than what we had talked about, but you've mentioned a couple times as we've spoke, to get to 100%, to get to a goal, that you really reach a comfort level of about 80% knowledge, 80% comfort, whatever that, however you term that. Can you Can you explain to me, how what all that means in terms of your ability to act and how you get to that confidence level to then act upon reaching and obtaining a goal?
Absolutely. So this idea of 80% is good enough. I say it's 80% is good enough to meet 100% of your goals. Now, clearly, based on your industry, I do not mean 80% compliance with industry
Right.
compliance issues, not that, right? That's not what I mean. But what I mean is when you're operating in a really challenging environment, know that if you've done the preparation, if you're staying engaged, if you're reading and listening, 80% is going to be good enough. It's about to start taking action. So we want to have this bias to act. And in order to do that, that means we are going to have to, kind of a bit of the cliche, but you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And this is that space where leading fearlessly forces you to not only acknowledge the possibility of failure, which is obviously rarely a fun experience, but it's trusting enough in yourself and in the values and vision of your team and your teammates that you're all headed generally in the same direction, and that you'll trust each other to get feedback, to adapt, to adjust, but that you'll figure it out. Too often, what I see, and especially during times of extreme change, which, when we're talking right now, in the last couple of weeks, there's been even another bigger upheaval, revolution, maybe of sorts, if you will, that people are feeling very on edge and uncertain, and they don't know what's going to happen. And the tendency then can be to pull back and to wait for things to settle out, to figure out what the new normal is going to be. But when you have this idea of 80% is good enough and you trust your team, that allows you to go forward and look around and go, I don't have the answer today, but I know we're going to figure it out. And you keep taking action in service of your teammates and your customers and clients, in spite of not knowing all of the answers.
Do we have time for one more quick question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so you and I were talking earlier, and I've said that I really would love to remove the word challenge and replace it with opportunity. So, what advice would you give to someone to help them stay relevant while they're facing these tremendous challenges slash opportunities right now?
So a couple of things. Think of it in two different buckets. The first one I would say is stay tenacious, right? Tenacity matters. It's easy to talk about, and we chatted a couple of weeks ago. It's easy to look at platitudes or motivational sayings on Instagram that people are like, "Stay gritty," right? But gritty kind of rhymes with something else because that's actually what it feels like. And part of in the mix and staying relevant is understanding that it's about staying tenacious. It's about being persistent while you're being patient. So it doesn't mean that you're not doing anything, but it means in spite of the unknowns, you keep having that bias to act. You keep reaching behind you and next to you and saying, I know we don't have the answers, but come on, let's keep moving forward and staying engaged. On an individual level, I think there are three things when I think about what is it going to take as we're leading through uncertainty. And these are again based upon some military experience, but on an individual level as well as a leadership level, just think about how are you communicating right now. I'd say number one, communicate relentlessly, and particularly for those people who kind of close back or shrink down and say I don't have anything to say right now, or you're terrified of saying the wrong thing and having the hammer drop down on you. Communicate relentlessly, but do it with empathy, do it with compassion, and understand that across the board, your teammates, there are going to be different levels that people are feeling stressed and burned out. So, part of that communicating, there are two sides of it, also means you have to be a really good listener. It doesn't mean that you're the one constantly with the megaphone. So, when I say communicate relentlessly, there are two parts of that. It's the speaking and sharing of direction and what success looks like. And it's the listening to understand what your teammates and what your clients and customers are going through. So I'd say communicate relentlessly. Um, Understand your internal pace of operations, that if for a few weeks you've pulled back and you've done a lot of bread baking, you've done a lot of being quiet, Netflixing or whatever, you're going to have to probably step it up a little bit right now, right? It's time to re-engage, Mav. Um, Totally cliche, and if you haven't watched Top Gun, you won't get that reference. But the third thing is continue to really reiterate what success looks like. We've talked about this before, and when we get together next year, probably I would imagine one of these things is not going to change. I always write down on a sticky note, and I'm going to, sorry, I'm reaching towards you, but I'm going to grab it off. I always write down my top three things because I try to clarify the complex and I put it where I can see it. So understand what's important to you. At the beginning of COVID, for me, I one of my sticky notes, and I think it's kind of actually dropped off, was family, fitness, and finances, in that order and in those buckets. Right, those are the three big things. I had kids all of a sudden at home going to school.
Mhm.
They didn't know what was going to happen. Now all of a sudden everyone's competing for bandwidth and laptops and everything. And what are they
Right.
doing? Fitness, I try to work out, but I've been baking a lot of bread. So I'm kind of cost neutral on that one right now. And then finances, right? Like you have to be really objective of where are you going, not only from a
Right.
company perspective, but a personal level as things change. So, but I try to keep it, I always net it down to three things because that to me feels like, and even from a brain science perspective, that I have a shot at being successful. If I write down a list of 17 things that are really important, they're not going to happen. So, uh, yeah, so those three things I'd say: communicate relentlessly, adjust your operation tempo to what the external environment is right now. Take a breath, and don't forget to always define what success looks like, because the path that you may have thought from a strategic plan or an individual plan was going to get you to that success 4 months ago, there are going to have to be some adjustments. Your flight plan for success right now will have to change because of the external marketplace. That doesn't mean that the end objective changes. It's just how you're going to get there will change. So those are my top three things I think right now.
That's fantastic. Well, Carey, I really appreciate your time, and more importantly, thank you for being so real and in many ways so relatable, for taking your experiences and allowing us to obviously hear about them, but to be able to kind of draw a correlation to where what we're going through right now. So I really appreciate that. Definitely look forward to seeing you next June. I know that our paths will cross and we'll stay in contact throughout the year. But I want to kind of wish you and your family health and happiness through the remainder of 2020. It's been an amazing 5.5 months here. So, but again, I really appreciate your sincerity and your honesty with me, and we all will look forward, and it'll be a real pleasure for our staff and all of our sponsors to engage and meet with you next year, June of 2021.
Oh gosh, likewise. And I'm happy to be part of the journey. And we've chatted a couple of times. If there's anything else along the way that you have any questions about, or anybody on your team, don't hesitate to hit me up via email, social media. If you want to, hop on a phone call for a second or whatever, I'm here. So we're all in it together ish in different ways. But I think as long as we just remain hopeful and engaged, and we listen to each other, that we will get to a place that's more valuable than where we are today. And for that, I'm grateful. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks.